So for the next part, we are going to make curving lines. Here we have experimented with spacing and size of the stitches, etc. in straight lines, and now we're switching to making curving lines. And I'm going to draw this line with a normal pencil, and that is something you can do too, but you can also use, if you like, a chalk pencil or erasable fabric marker. Or you do not draw a line at all, but just stitch, hand stitch, free stitch following a curving line. And I'm using the pencil because that hopefully shows up really well in the video. And I'm doing a rather good curve here on the end. And let's take a dark red thread this time. And tying a knot in my thread. And I'll use my embroidery hoop. It's always a bit difficult when you're at the edge of the fabric, but I think this will be just fine. Yes, the line that I drew fits into the hoop. And tightening the screw. So we're ready to start stitching. And now I'm going to turn the hoop just in the way that works with the line I'm following. So I'm starting here, and this time, for instance, I'm doing an open beginning of the line, the row. And now the left part, so the vertical part of the stitches, is going to follow the line. So I started here on the line. So whatever I do, where I come up, that's on the line. And I'm going into the curve here, and I'll do some things like a smaller stitch, a bigger stitch. And as you can see already, the lines inside of the curve they look a bit like they're pointing towards a center here. You don't have to be really precise in that. Just keep following the pencil line. And these, you could say, are like the spokes of a wheel. And well, this is a bit of a straight, not so curvy part of the line. And I'll show you, when you're following a more or less straight line, you can create a different kind of curve. And a bit in the way that we did here, by making stitches longer. And then shorter again. And you get a kind of curve on this side too. So the width of what you're doing with the blanket stitch also gives a kind of line and perhaps a curve that you can follow. Now I'm coming to a part where the curve is like this and the spokes are outwards. Perhaps you could say more like rays. And what I do is also this part, this curve, you can see as part of a circle with the point in the middle, perhaps somewhere here. So I keep pointing my needle towards that point, more or less. It isn't all that precise. I could, of course, keep the stitches horizontal, but that would give a bit of a strange effect, and this gives more when you follow the curve. Keep your needle following the curve, pointing towards an imaginary center. You get more of a flowing effect. Now I'll come to this last curve, and that's very similar to that first one. So my spokes or rays are going to point to the inside of this semicircle. And now when you're doing something like that, curve like this, you might run into a particular kind of problem, and that is especially when you make big stitches. So I'm going to show you, I'm going to make a couple of very big stitches here in this curve. I'm exaggerating a bit, these are very big. So, and well, the first thing that you see is that, perhaps you can see the pencil line here, that with big stitches, this line doesn't follow the line that I drew with pencil very fluently. So there's less fluency when you are making these kind of big stitches into the curve. But with the blanket stitch, it's also not a problem. You don't see it much now, but if you would embroider more and you would handle the fabric a bit, the danger is that you get this effect. These parts, what we said, vertical parts of the stitches, might collapse inwards. And yes, you can correct that by pulling them outwards again with the needle, and perhaps a bit more tension will help, but that risk of the stitches collapsing when you're making a curve like this is present and happens. And one of the things you can do, if you do want to have these really big stitches, one of the things you can do is fixating them with a little stitch in the middle, and that will definitely keep them from collapsing. But most of the time, to get a nice fluent line, I'm undoing these big stitches. It's better with a curve like this to not make the stitches too big. Smaller stitches will have less tendency to collapse than big stitches. So in a curve like this, it's preferable to do the stitches relatively close together, especially this part. With a curve like this, it's not a problem at all, because there you would make the vertical part of the stitches a lot smaller. And that's the part that tends to collapse. So small vertical stitches is no problem at all. It's especially here, when the outside of the curve tends to become very big, that you have this risk of collapsing stitches. And I'm thinking I have a bit of thread left. Perhaps you have too. And I'm just going to continue. And as you can see here, I'm making a really, what you call it, tight curve. And if I would like to do that in the other direction, I have to remember to not make the stitches too big. And I can do it in a way that these spokes pointing inside are nearly touching each other. So this is a good thing to try. And also to experiment a bit. How can you let your stitches curve and move over the fabric? And this gives you a lot of freedom and fluency in what you can do with the blanket stitch. Well, I've nearly run out of thread, and I'll do a last stitch. And in this case, I think it looks nice if I go down directly outside the corner of this stitch. So here you have a swerving, curving line. And finish off the thread. Under a few more. Yes. Now the next step will be that these curves we're going to work in small circles with the blanket stitch.